I'm with Jennifer Blanke, the head of the Global Competitiveness Network here at the World Economic Forum. Jennifer, the US has slipped from first to second place in the GCR rankings for 2009. Given the economic crisis, some observers might have expected a bigger fall. Can you explain?
Well, we do see that the U.S. has certainly gone down in certain areas measured by the Global Competitiveness Index. In particular, we've seen a weakening of the quality of financial markets and also macroeconomic stability more generally. These are things that have been building up over time, imbalances building up over time, which have been exacerbated really by the economic crisis. However, the U.S. continues to be really characterized by a number of strengths related to productivity, such as its sophisticated business culture, innovative companies, the great extent of collaboration between companies and the business sector in innovation, very flexible labor market, and so on and so forth. And so basically all of these things come together to make the U.S. still very competitive. So again, it has gone down in the rankings because of financial markets, because of macro instability, but overall remains very competitive.
Similarly, Switzerland is number one despite of having a pretty difficult year, especially in the banking sector. Why the rise?
Well, you have to remember that these are relative rankings. In fact, what we're seeing in the case of Switzerland is that, although actually Switzerland hasn't really changed its performance since last year, it hasn't improved, it's maintained a pretty stable performance, but other countries have been weakening, such as the US, as I just mentioned. Specifically, you mentioned the banking sector. Indeed, in Switzerland, we've seen that in absolute terms, there's been a weakening of the financial market and particularly of the soundness of banks. That's the perception of the business community, however, less of a weakening than in other places. So combined together with Switzerland's other strengths, things like, again, innovation as in the US, but also excellent institutional environment, governance, infrastructure, etc. Switzerland really is well placed this year, and it makes sense that Switzerland is number one in the rankings.
What would you pick out as the most interesting movers across Europe? For example, I see the UK is continuing to slide.
Yes, in the UK we do see that it continues to slide. It started sliding last year and it goes down by another place this year. That really related to continuing weakening of financial markets. Similarly, we're seeing that in Iceland. Iceland goes down quite a bit in our rankings, and that's mainly related to a huge weakening in terms of its macroeconomic stability or a rise in macroeconomic instability, not surprising given the economic meltdown in the country just recently. However, both of these countries continue to have a number of strengths related to technological innovation, education, and so on and so forth. And so hopefully they'll have some strengths to help them ride out this storm. Looking to other types of countries, if we look to the accession countries to the European Union, this year the Czech Republic actually comes in first out of all of the new EU members, the 12 new EU members, particularly by improving the functioning of its markets and also its ability to harness new technologies for productivity.
The Middle East looks strong, particularly the UAE. What are the reasons behind that?
Yes, the UAE is doing quite well and has gone up quite a bit. Also Qatar, Qatar actually being the highest ranked country in the Middle East, North Africa region this year. These countries have done a lot in recent years. It's actually been an upward trend over the past few years that we've seen in terms of their competitiveness. They've had windfall oil revenues, and these have really been invested well into the productive sector. They've been making a lot of reforms to their economies, and this has been very important for helping them to boost their competitiveness.
Many African countries continue to prop up the table, but are there any success stories?
Well, of course there are success stories in Africa. South Africa, Mauritius, Botswana continue to be among the top-ranked countries in the top half of the rankings with many different strengths. Most other countries in Africa are lower, certainly in the lower half in the rankings, and many quite low, as you mentioned. But we do see areas of specific strength in individual countries. For example, Ghana has very strong, at least by regional standards, governance. And Kenya has quite high innovation potential. So these are the sorts of strengths that we're seeing in the region.
And finally, how do the rankings reflect the current crisis? And do you see any interesting trends forming?
Well, competitiveness is very much a medium to long-term concept. It's really thinking about how countries will fare in terms of improving their prosperity over time. So really it will only be important, or it will only affect competitiveness to the extent that it affects those underlying factors. And this is the case in things like financial markets, as we've seen in the United States and the United Kingdom. In terms of trends, what we've seen, it's interesting to look at the BRIC economies, for example, the emerging market BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. There's a bit of a split among them this year, with actually Brazil, India, and China going up in the rankings and being able to improve their competitiveness even amid the crisis, while Russia's going down quite a bit. So perhaps this is the beginning of a trend that we will see in terms of divergence based on the kinds of reforms that these countries have been putting in place.